A while ago, I said I would be making this video sometime in the future. Well, this is the future, or at least it is compared to back then, so hello everybody. My name is Professor Scalar, and here is the continuation to the ultimate beginner's guide of everything you need to know to GTFO. In this video, I will be talking about stuff that I did talk about in the previous video. Or at least, I'll be expanding upon stuff and talk about more advanced stuff about those topics. So if you have not seen the previous video and you aren't what you would consider a veteran at this game by this point, I highly recommend you go back and watch that video. Now, this video is going to be not rundown specific. I'm going to try not to talk about rundown specific stuff, but obviously some of the things I mentioned may or may not be in rundowns. A good example for foreshadowing, some of the enemies I talk about aren't in this rundown, but they have been in the previous two rundowns. So, everything I talk in this video may not be in the rundown that you are currently in, or it may be changed. Keep in mind this is an early access game, so everything I talk about is not guaranteed to be the same in future rundowns. A good example for that was I was going to talk about a way you could kite 50 enemies without getting hit and kill them all with your hammer. However, that was something that was available in Rundown 2 but is not doable in Rundown 3. So, stuff I talk about may not be relevant in future rundowns. However, I would still say give this video a good watch, as for the most part, I think everything I talk about shouldn't change between rundowns or will change very, very minutely, so you don't have to worry too much about differences. But that's about it, so let's get into this video and let's start talking about what I consider are the more advanced tips and tricks, and what can turn you from a good player to a great player. Starting off, I want to very briefly talk about the loadout. I mentioned in the past that you want to focus on experimenting with different weapons and figuring out what you like using, because pretty much anything can work. Well, that is mostly true, but also not completely true. Every time you do a rundown, or every time you do a level, think of it as a scouting mission. You're going in not to beat it, but to figure out what the level is, what you're going to be facing a lot, and what type of weapons you should bring in. Same with the tools. If you're in a level with a ton of enemies and you are using up ammo like crazy because you can't stealth it, you're going to want high capacity weapons, like the SMG. Or maybe if you have a bunch of big dudes, you're going to want something like the burst cannon or the sniper or the shotgun, so you can deal with them more effectively because you don't have as much smaller enemies you have to deal with. Figure out the strength and weaknesses of all of the weapons and go into a level trying to figure out what you need so you know the best weapons to take in with you. Tools are essential when it comes to beating levels. Well, for the most part, I should say. But how do you know the most effective ones to take in? Well, you won't know until you play a level and figure out what you really need. But a good default would be 2 shotgun sentries, a mine deployer, and then either a biotracker or C-foam launcher. I preferably like the C-foam launcher. Now, where do these succeed much better over other ones, and how or what should you be looking for to decide what you should be taking into a level? C-foam launcher excels at delaying enemies and buying yourself time. If you're in a level where you're trying to do security doors or stuff and you just find you don't have enough time to do everything before you get overwhelmed, C-foam is the answer. Turrets do a good job at killing enemies, and mines do a good job at killing a ton of enemies, but what do you do when all the doors are broken open and they can run straight past the turrets and there are no mines left to defend you? C-foam buys you the time you need to finish everything you need to do before enemies get into you. Also, pairing that up on a door that has a wall facing towards it is a wonderful thing to do, where you can stockpile all the enemies at that door and then have 2 or 3 mines just obliterate pretty much the entire wave. So that's when you want to be looking out for C-foam. Biotracker is useful for when you can't rely on your eyes. There will be levels in the future, most likely anyway, where your eyes just won't work, either due to very dark areas where you just can't use your flashlight, or super foggy rooms where you just can't see anything, or areas where there are tons of scouts or enemies that are practically impossible to see, sort of like the Shadow. So if you have a level like this and you need to have extra eyes that can tell you where enemies are at all times, then this is the tool for you. Also, if they add in enemies that move around more, besides the Scout, this will also be very useful. Mind Deployer. When does the Mind Deployer succeed above the others? This is great at dealing with large groups of enemies and is very efficient at killing big enemies like the Hybrid, Big Striker, and Big Shooter, or the Chargers. How do you know when to use it though? If you have blood doors, this is the perfect time to use it. A mine on a blood door is by far way more successful than any turret ever will be, or at least upon opening the blood door, I should say. Mines on doors you can shut, especially with the wall facing towards that door, it's also very good. These can easily deal with much larger groups of enemies than any turret will ever be able to deal with. So, if you have a ton of enemies you have to kill at once and you're sort of stuck in a tight area, Mind Deployer is great. Or, if there's a ton of entrances enemies can come through and you can't possibly put a turret at all of them. This is also where Mind Deployer is great, because it means it can deal with some of the areas where you can't place down a turret. First Sentry. I hate to say it, but I've said this ever since Rundown 1 and it has not changed. It's useless. I have never, ever once found myself in a position where I said, yeah, I'll take the Burst Sentry, that's the superior one. It just isn't. It has a ton of ammo in it, yes, but it's just not efficient at killing enemies, especially because enemies just run right past it and don't care about it. If enemies were slower and it could kill them more effectively before they got to you, then I'd recommend it, but it just isn't. Even in long corridor tunnels where you might think a Shotgun Sentry isn't good, I would still recommend the Shotgun Sentry. Just place the shotgun one facing towards the enemy when they run at you rather than towards their back. Yes, it does less damage because it's not hitting the back, but it will be able to kill them faster because every turret sort of has a little charge up time before it shoots the enemy, the shotgun one being longer. So placing a shotgun turret facing towards the enemy where they're going to be running to means it'll shoot it in the front, and the charge up time will start when they initially run down that hallway instead of when they've already ran past the turret. So I really can't recommend the Burst Sentry, and until they change it or remove the Shotgun Sentry, I don't think I ever will recommend this to anybody to use. Shotgun Sentry, I already briefly mentioned. This is sort of the tool, in my opinion, that you take when you just don't have anything else better you need. You pretty much never need to take more than one C-foam launcher or Mind Deployer, and you don't often need a bio-tracker. The Shotgun Sentry, while it's very useful, in my opinion, it's overrated, and to me, it's not a tool of, oh yeah, Shotgun Sentry would be beautiful here. It's, yeah, there's nothing else I'm gonna take, so let's just fill in the gaps of Shotgun Sentry. And that's just how I view it, because most of the time, the Mind Deployer can actually handle it better. Mind Deployer just can't handle wide open areas where you can't make choke points. That's more so when a shotgun turret is better. But that's all there really is to the tools and the loadouts. So now let's get into some advanced enemy mechanics. Before, I talked about how enemies detect you and what you could try to do to avoid it. But now I'm going to tell you a little thing that a lot of people don't know about. When you see an enemy, think of a circle around it and a cone in front of it. That circle is what a lot of people sort of, think of, is it's sort of a circle radius of how long it can detect. But they don't know about the cone, which is their line of sight. Enemies do have a line of sight, and this line of sight is longer than the circle. Meaning, if you kill an enemy and another enemy is facing towards that enemy you just killed, it has a higher chance of waking up, especially if it's already glowing, very high chance of you setting it off. A very simple way to counter this is stand in between the two enemies. Standing in between enemies actually does block line of sight, and you may think, oh well, it's not that big of a deal if they're too far away. What if I told you this can change things with enemies that are like 5 meters away from each other? Yes, that's right. You can have two enemies basically right next to each other, but as long as there's enough room for you to fit in between the two enemies and stand in between them, you can kill one of them without setting off the other one as long as it's not glowing. This is a very nice skill that I love to abuse, and very few people seem to really know about it. This also works even if they're not facing each other. Just standing between enemies in general acts as if you're a wall, and it blocks their detection radius. Use this if you have situations where maybe there are 5 enemies next to each other and you can block the line of sight from that 5th one. Or if you're a person like me who likes to go off on his own and clear rooms since I'm confident and know I can do it, take advantage of this situation if you have 2 enemies close to each other, but not close enough to the point where you won't be able to slip in between them. This can save you from a lot of unfortunate set-offs. Enemy detection. You can walk near enemies. I said in the first video you usually want to crouch, but let's just say you get a little bit tired of always crouching everywhere because you could be going a bit faster through levels. Well, you can walk. By no means did I mean you are not allowed to walk near enemies. Just keep in mind that walking means that they will start glowing a lot faster. But you can still walk a pretty fair distance. You can walk the entire time they're glowing as long as you're not walking when they're throbbing. Throbbing is the final threshold. So, if you see a bunch of enemies and you want to get close to them quickly, just walk. Especially, let's say if there's 4 enemies next to each other and you want to do a consecutive takedown. The issue is if you crouch and do it one at a time, is the first person, once they get there, then all the enemies start to glow more often. And then when the second person gets there, and then the third, it gets worse and worse. Eventually, you get to the point where the 4th person pretty much can't even take a step, even if they're crouching, before the enemies light up and start throbbing. You can move as much as you want as long as they don't throb. Just make sure you try to stop a little bit before they throb. Assuming you don't sprint or you don't use your light, the amount of time it takes for them to throb is always going to be the same. So take advantage of that. Walk when you can and just stop before they throb. Also, multiple people can walk at the same time. If you have 4 enemies and you all want to get in position, all 4 of you walk at the same time. Yes, it may be a little bit riskier, but literally, as long as nobody moves while they're throbbing, you're perfectly fine. So take advantage of this and walk around. Same thing applies to like jumping and stuff. As long as it's not sprinting, which is a hard set off, you can do as much of it as you want as long as they are not throbbing. Same thing with the light. As long as you don't flash an enemy that's throbbing, you're fine. You want to synchronize a room? Just flash every single one of them. The enemies that are already glowing will start throbbing, but as long as you don't keep your light on them for too long, you're perfectly fine. So don't think you have to stop moving the second they turn pink. You have plenty of time to keep moving before they throb. A mechanic that a lot of people don't really use, and I feel like it is a thing that while it doesn't have a ton of uses, it can be quite the lifesaver. And that's shoving an enemy. Remember, your right click is a shove, and while it does no damage, it makes it so they can't do anything either. If you consecutively shove an enemy and you don't miss, an enemy is unable to scream to set off a room, and it's unable to attack you. Granted, this doesn't work on all enemies, but stuff like the shooters and the strikers, and I think even the scouts, I haven't been able to test it on them, but even the scouts, you can just keep on shoving over and over and over again as long as you're quick about it. This is beautiful for situations where you may accidentally set off an enemy and you don't have enough time to melee it before it screams. Just either shove it and have a teammate come up and kill it for you, or shove it out of the room. As long as it's not crouched on the ground, you can shove them really far. Just keep booping it until you get it out of the room you're in, and then kill it in there. That way if it does scream, it won't set off the room you were just in. Just be careful because obviously you're moving around, so if you're shoving an enemy near others and you move when they're throbbing, you'll set them off anyway. Also make sure you don't end up shoving that enemy into more enemies. But take advantage. This works beautifully on shooters and strikers, and it might even work on enemies like the Charger or the Scouts. Again, I've not tested with those two, but it might work just fine. Take advantage of shoving and use it in situations where you don't have the time to melee. Remember, your teammates can always come and back you up while you're shoving an enemy. two of probably my favorite tips in this game, and what I think are probably the things that most people don't even know about this, is how you can light tap, one tap certain enemies, and how you can dodge enemy attacks. Let's start off with the one tap light tap. You can one tap regular shooters and strikers in the back of the head with a simple melee. I'm not talking a charged melee, I literally mean clicking your melee button and that's it. You can kill them. The reason for this is, as you can see here on screen with this image, you see enemy weak spots. The back of the head gives you both a head damage multiplier and a back body damage multiplier, meaning you get both of them. This makes it so that a light tap melee is enough to kill them. However, it's not foolproof. I have had a few times where it does not kill. I've had times where the hands are glitching through the head, so it's considered a hand hit, and other times where the game just simply says, yeah, no, that didn't kill, does not count. I would not recommend trying to do this when you could literally just do a fully charged melee hit. This is more useful for when you have two enemies right on top of each other, so you can fully charge one and then light tap the other, or just simply have your teammates come and help. Or if you have a ton of enemies coming towards you and you don't want to shoot them, or you just don't have the ammo to shoot them. Just start light tapping and aim for the back of the head. If they are facing towards you, it is actually still doable to do this. Just get close to them and aim for the top of their head, because your swing will come back and around and sometimes hit the back of their head. This can be very useful for when having to deal with larger groups of enemies and when you just want to spam click. And heck, if you don't kill, you may blow off the head anyway and cause the enemy to flinch and stop their attack that might be coming at you. Use this when you think it might be the best time to do it. Now, dodging is probably the juiciest and, in my opinion, probably the most important tip in this entire video. How do you dodge an enemy attack? Well, with shooters, it's self-explanatory. It's a projectile. Literally just crouch before it hits you and you dodge the attack, or just get behind cover. But the strikers is where it really is important. You might think, how can you dodge a tongue attack that travels super quickly at me? Well, jumping. It sounds a bit weird, but if you're running away from a striker, you can spam jump while sprinting and you'll jump over the tongue attack. Sometimes or most of the time, strikers aim for your legs when they do the tongue attack. Sometimes they do aim for your head, but most of the time it's for the legs, and if you jump over the attack. The timing for this, assuming the enemy was behind you when it started the attack, is jump when you hear them making their sound effect when they're about to attack. The little, like, God, that was bad. When they make that sound effect though, that's when you want to jump. Just keep spam jumping and you can do this. If you're running into large groups of enemies, sort of like this in the video, you sort of want to jump before you get within melee range of them. Now, this can be difficult if you have a large group of enemies, but you may notice I'm still getting hit, but I'm not getting killed immediately. You are able to just jump through enemies and dodge their attacks. If I was sprinting, almost every single one of these guys would hit me and kill me immediately, because there's no invincibility frames in this game. Now, how do you do it with big strikers though? It's the opposite. Sprint and crouch. When you sprint and crouch at the same time, you'll slide a little bit. If you do this right when you hear the sound effect of them trying to attack you from behind, you will sometimes dodge the attack. I have a lot less success with this one though, so I don't recommend it nearly as much. In all honesty, I would recommend you shooting a big striker and causing it to flinch that way, then I would recommend trying to dodge its tongue attack. But it is doable, and if you find yourself in a situation where you have no ammo or you can't shoot it and it's about to attack you, this is your best bet. However, like I said, you need to do the slide as you hear charging up the sound or doing the charge up effect. When it does that effect, that's when it locks on to where it's shooting. So if you try to crouch before this, it will aim downwards at you. If you do it any later, then you won't duck fast enough before the tongue hits you. So use these tips when dealing with large groups of enemies and try to dodge them. You can also combine running through enemies and jumping with your melee hit to try to kill them, either doing full charge hits or just doing light hits to try to damage most of them and maybe get a kill here and there if you hit the back of the head. But I highly recommend Use these tips to make life easier. One tapping could be a huge difference when it comes to setting off a room and not setting off a room, and sliding and jumping could be a huge difference when it comes to getting killed by a giant group of enemies or only losing about half of your HP when you run through them. Yes, I'm talking about terminals once more. No, this is not really what I would consider advanced, it's just something I didn't talk about in the previous one. When it comes to terminals, you don't have to be super specific when listing stuff. For example, if you want to list a key but you don't know what the key is called, aka D1, you can literally just type in list space key space and then a zone. And there, it's useful because it's zone 389 or 390. A lot of people tend to type down list key, figure out the name of the key card, and then query that key. You can save time by literally just typing list key 389, and then if it doesn't appear, you know it's in 390. And this works for a lot of other stuff. You could type list RES for resource, and then any zone that you want, and it'll tell you all the resources in that zone. And nothing else like security doors or fog turbines and stuff like that. It's a pretty useful thing when you want to see if something is in a level, like a fog turbine, a power cell, or anything like that, but you don't want to manually check every single zone. Is you can actually save commands and type in new commands while it's doing a command. What I mean by this is if you hit the up arrow, it'll bring up whatever you just typed in and hit enter on. And you can keep typing up or hitting up to go up the list or down the list. This only works per player though, so one person can't type in a command and then the other person hit the up arrow. But you can leave something in a terminal and walk away and it'll still be there for everybody when they enter into the terminal. Also, for levels like B1, where you have to type in verification codes into a terminal, a very easy way to do that is instead of retyping the same command, type in your command and then hit enter with the code. Then as it's processing that code, hit the up arrow, which will bring up the previous one, then hit backspace 4 times to delete your current code, and then you're good. As soon as it's finished processing, on that screen, you'll already have the new thing typed in, so all you have to do is dip out, get what your current code is, go back in, and then type in the 4-letter code, hit enter, rinse and repeat. It's a very minor thing that doesn't have a ton of uses, but on levels where you have to do a lot of stuff with terminals, being able to hit the up arrow or just keeping a command in the terminal for later to hit, anything like that is always helpful because it can save you a little bit of time. A security type door that you will actually see pretty often is the blood door. This is not too rare of an occurrence, but I decided to save it for this video due to the fact that you don't see it every level and there is a new enemy that I consider a bit more complicated behind it, so better save both of them for here. The blood door is a bit of an interesting one. Think of the opposite of an alarm door. Most of the time you just straight up open it, or there will only be a full team scan and that's it, and there's no alarm that goes off when you do it. But you'll notice that the door says motion detectors triggered. The reason for this is there's a ton of enemies on the other side of the door that are already awake and aggroed onto you. They don't exist though until you actually open the door, so you cannot just see how many there are with a bio tracker. At the same time though, the room that's connected to the blood door may have enemies that are naturally sleeping in there. Those enemies will automatically wake up when the door opens due to the fact that the enemies from the blood door will scream. This can be devastating in some situations where there is a scout behind the blood door. It's not common, but this is something that could occur. With the blood doors, the best way to deal with them is placing your turrets at the base of them, facing the direction you're going to hide. That way it'll face the way the enemies are going to charge, and place some mines in the cracks here. These are beautiful areas to put mines as it deals with a large group of the enemies immediately because they all spawn right next to the door and then run through pretty much at the same time. If you can face a mine towards the blood door, that's even better. But the new enemy you're going to have to deal with is the hybrid, which I'll talk about later or earlier in this guide, depending on the order I do all of this. Very last note about them, it's not common as well, but there are times that a blood door is also an alarm door. You could tell this by looking at the door and it'll say alarm detected and not motion detectors triggered. If you see alarm detected, set up for an actual alarm door, and then when you finish the alarm, you'll be doing the blood door potion. They do not activate at the same time, thankfully. You just have to do the alarm first, and then that will unlock the door and you can open it and deal with the blood door. So do make sure you read the text before seeing a blood door and assuming it's just a regular blood door. Along with blood doors, we also have surge alarm doors and error alarm doors. Let's talk about the surge ones first. These made their first debut on Rundown 2 E1 and have not appeared since. How they would work is every single scan would be a full team scan, which sounds simple in itself, but is really the other mechanic that's really challenging. When it comes to an alarm door, there is a maximum amount of enemies that could be on the field at once due to that alarm. Well, a surge alarm takes that limit and spawns it in pretty much immediately. And every time you kill an enemy, it spawns in a new one to replace it within about 5 seconds. This makes it that you can't really just kill all the enemies before you finish the surge alarm, which could be pretty difficult. The best way to deal with these is just focus on the surge alarms and get them all done. But if you're in a really wide open room and you can't barricade anything, then you pretty much have to play Ring Around the Rosie through any zones you've unlocked until you're finally able to finish every single scan. However, a key thing to mention is back in Rundown 2, you could run and jump through enemies and pretty much never get hit pretty easily. That's not a thing anymore in Rundown 3. So, what's going to happen if they bring back surge alarms? The simple answer being, I'm not really sure. If they're in rooms where you can barricade doors and just do the simple turret and mine setups, then that's probably going to be your way. But if they're in giant wide open rooms, they might just end up forcing you to have to gun down enemies. So stuff like this in the footage that you're seeing isn't really doable anymore. So these might never come back unless if they find a way to implement them and make them fair, because the initial idea behind it was introduced back with that mechanic in mind. Next, we have the error alarm. This is something that is becoming more often, and you'll see it quite a bit with every single rundown from this point on. How they work is one of two ways. Either they will occur when you open up an actual error door, or they will occur as soon as you load into a level. If it's a level that has it from the beginning, it's either there for the entire level, or it's there until you complete a specific objective and it shuts it off. If it occurs once you open a door, then usually it's it usually will last until you finish the level. What do they do though? Well, when they occur, the alarm will never stop once you finish the scan. When you open an error door, it will keep on spawning in waves of enemies, but not like a normal alarm door. It will, roughly, this changes depending on the level and the length of it, but usually it will spawn in 4 enemies every 30 seconds, which actually is not that terrible. It also will not set off enemies in future rooms, even though the alarm is constantly going. Depending on what type of stage you're thrown into with this depends on how you should approach these type of things. If you're thrown into a level where one goes off right off the bat, like R3D1, you need to move and figure out your objective and get to it as fast as you can. But you want to stay grouped. Splitting up will get you killed very quickly due to the fact that enemies will spawn in random locations if you split up too much, because obviously the whole 2-room away thing won't apply anymore if you're covering every single room. Or maybe it'll be 2 rooms away from one person, but that 2 rooms away is on top of another player. So be careful with that. If it's a door you have to open, then you can set up for this. In C1, there's an error alarm at the end of the level, and with this, it's you have to go in and find something and then take that back to the beginning of the level. How you would set up for that is have some people defend outside of the door to kill enemies that are going to be coming initially, because they'll only spawn behind you, while the other people go forward and start taking care of the future rooms. Now, the issue with this is if the zone is too big though, then the people who go further on ahead could have them spawn on top of them. You can either fix this by making sure that when this does happen, you run back to your other teammates, you deal with them if you're able to, or you can simply have the people defending you come into the zone once you clear out a room or two to make sure you don't split up too much. But with these, you really need to strategize with your team, figure out who is doing what, and know what the plan is. These will vary greatly depending on the type of level, what your objective is, and what may happen or what the enemy is that spawns in, because that could also change stuff up. So trial and error, figure out what you're doing, and strategize with your team to figure out the best solution to dealing with this. How to better set up for alarm doors and know the best way to set up for them. Well, it does take maybe doing it once or twice to know exactly where enemies come from, but you can make pretty good guess. For example, here in C1, this is the first alarm door you have to do. There are 4 entrances to this room, so you might think you have to defend all 4 of them. Well, no. The rule of thumb is enemies will spawn 2 rooms away from you, and they will take the fastest path to get to you. Now, some people think a doorway counts as like a solid barricade. It more so counts as time. Think of it this way. If you don't move at all, how long does it take from the enemy to walk to where you are? Now, when it comes to a door, how much extra time does that door add onto it? Seafoam is not calculated in all of this, but think of a door as a set amount of time, like 5 more seconds for them to get to you. So you may have an open door that's much further away that they could come through, and a shut door that's closer, but they will probably take that shut door. Yes, they have to break it down, but that will be faster than going through the open doorway. So that's why sometimes if you leave doors open, it doesn't always funnel them. It might not actually make the path shorter for them. And when it comes to this alarm door, there are 2 areas enemies can spawn. They can either spawn in your spawn point, or they will spawn behind this door in the east. So because of this, there are 2 base spawns. Now where can they come? Obviously the people from the south are going to take the 2 south doors, and the people from the east will take the 2 east doors. But will they take all 4? The simple answer is no, they will not. The enemies from down south won't take this door here at all, and the enemies from the east won't take this door. The reason for this is because of pathing. What door will they reach the fastest, and from that door, what's the fastest they will reach you? South enemies will have a much faster time climbing up this very short ladder and then going through the door than they would going the long way around to bust down that left door. Same with the east side. It's much faster for them to walk up the stairs and break that door down than it is for them to walk further to the north just to get through that other door. For this reason, you know you only have to set up those 2 doors. Obviously make sure the other 2 doors are shut because they are close enough that the pathing would be faster if they're open, but you can seafoam those, place your turrets outside of them, and mine them. But here's another thing. I said enemies spawn behind this door. So make sure that one's shut too, because then they have to break it down, and place a mine on it as well, because that means it'll blow up a lot of the enemies when they break down the door. Pay attention to the 2 room rule so you know where every spawn point is. Don't just think this is a spawn point, let's set up in case they come from here. Figure out every single spawn point. Figure out where they can all potentially spawn from and set up what is the most likely path. This isn't always guaranteed, as sometimes enemy pathing can be really weird and this might catch you off guard, but if this occurs, keep it in mind. Also, if you want to funnel enemies through a specific door, keep it open. If you keep it open, they'll funnel through it, and then you can set it up much better to defend. This could be very useful for situations where all 3 doors are just as efficient, so they could literally take any 3 of them, but you only have enough resources to set up for 1 door. Instead of taking a gamble of which one they'll take, just keep one open, and you're good to go. Use tips and tricks like this to figure out the best way to set up for alarms. Also, listen. When enemies spawn in, you will hear the roar of it. So pay attention and listen to figure out where enemies will spawn from. This can also greatly help you out, because not only does this give you a better idea of where they spawn from initially, but every run it'll tell you which side they came from, so you know what side you should focus your attention on. Especially if you have 2 doors they could come through, but you only have enough seafoam for 1 of them. Listen, you hear what door they're going to come for, you know which one to seafoam before they break it down. This can help you out greatly. This also helps out tremendously on error alarms where enemies spawn randomly, or scouts when a scout spawns in a wave. Knowing where it will come from will save you a lot of headache. And now for the last portion of this video, let's talk about all the enemies that are in the game that I did not talk about in the first one. Starting off with the Chargers. The Charger, probably my favorite enemy in the entire game, and in all honesty, I'm not exactly sure why. Just something about these enemies I really enjoy. I don't know if it's the cool sounds they make, the type of ambiance that they're in with like the level designs, or if it's just the fact that they're pitch black enemies and really difficult to see. I don't know, but I just really enjoy the Charger. When you look at these, think of a middle ground between a striker and a big striker. These guys love to rush you. They have spikes all over their head, meaning their heads are not weak spots or crit spots. You can still one-shot them with melee, but it has to be to the back in the spinal region with a fully charged hit, or 2 fully charged hits anywhere else will kill them as well. You cannot go for a headshot in the front and expect to kill them. Also, you cannot just melee them from the front and expect to kill them with one person. For this reason, if you do end up setting off a Charger, don't try to melee it in the front and try to stumble it, because they also do not stumble very easily due to the fact that they're armored. Their damage is about 18% with their ranged, so their tongue attack does deal a fair amount of damage, and their punches only do 4%. However, they are basically like boxers where they will do 3 punches really quickly, easily doing 12% damage. Stay close to each other, don't split up too much, and if you notice that they are chasing primarily you, just run and let your team deal with them. You do less damage, or I should say you do normal damage when shooting in the front, so it's harder to kill them than it is compared to normal enemies. You cannot really aim for the head and kill them quickly. However, stuff like the burst cannon and the regular shotgun do tap or one tap these guys, so they are pretty useful. Do be careful too, because most of the time these enemies spawn, they spawn in very dark rooms, which makes it very difficult to see them. BioTracker is a good friend when it comes to trying to figure out where they're hiding. But other than that, there's really not too much about them. As long as you don't wake them up, they're no issue. One person is enough to melee them, and it's not too difficult even if you do wake them up, as long as you stay grouped and don't split up. Shadows. Pretty interesting enemies and a little bit of a controversial enemy in the community. It is the same stat-wise as a regular striker, from health to damage to everything. However, they are a literal walking shadow. This makes it very difficult to see them. In dark rooms, it's pretty much impossible. In foggy zones, it's super difficult. But if you have a flashlight or a long-range flashlight, it makes it quite a bit easier. However, the most essential tool for dealing with them is the BioTracker. Shadows will not be targeted by either the burst sentry or the shotgun sentry unless if they are tracked with a BioTracker. And even then, the mark only lasts for about 5 seconds. Now, this is something you have to be careful of, because the recharge time of the BioTracker is longer than the ping is. So if you ping an enemy, or if you ping a shadow, and the turret doesn't kill it completely, you won't be able to ping it right away and that turret will stop shooting it. This can be pretty devastating if you're trying to barricade a door and you don't do the ping at the correct time. Try to time it so that the ping will happen as they're entering turret range, so the turret will immediately start shooting at them. Also, this makes it easier for you, the player, to shoot, because they tend to run through you, camp behind you, and attack you from behind. So watch each other's backs, keep that BioTracker pinging them, and be careful. Mines will blow up normally if they walk through them, so you don't have to ping them for that, but the turret requires the ping. If you loved the regular shadows, you're gonna love this enemy, or you'll hate it a lot. This is the Big Shadow. The same as a big striker when it comes to all of its stats except for speed. It is incredibly fast, faster than almost every other enemy in the game. However, it is still not faster than you, thankfully. But these guys can be a huge pain when having to deal with them. They've only appeared once, which was back in Rundown 2 on E1, and they only appeared in one zone you had to go to. But even then, they were quite a challenging enemy, especially if you didn't know how to deal with them. The issue with it is you cannot see them, and these guys were naturally sleeping. They were not awake. So you had to walk through the zone, and flashing them with your light to try to see the outline was not a good idea because you could wake them up. Trying to stealth kill them too could also be a challenge because if too many people missed their melee strip or melee swings, then you all would get punched for 40% damage and then set off a giant zone full of big shadows that you cannot see. Easiest way to deal with them is the bio tracker. Their ping will last just as long as any other enemy, it's not shortened like the regular shadow, and it makes it so turrets can shoot at them. So you could sneak by them, which is what a lot of people did, was just ignore them completely and go through the zone and not take care of anything. Obviously, if they come back in the future though, that might not be an option. Stealth killing can be made easier if you have a shotgun turret. Placing the turret down, it won't shoot at him because he's not pinged yet, and it'll leave that light that keeps going left and right that makes it easier to see their outline. Placing down a shotgun sentry and then sneaking up behind him carefully to make sure you don't accidentally touch him, and then going for the 3 or 4 melee swings to the back is the best way to deal with him. When you do swing, make sure you step forward a little bit if you're not usually the first person who hits, just to make sure that you actually land the hit when he falls forward a little bit after the first or second hit connects. If you do wake them up, don't try to shoot them or melee kill them back, just run. Because they're shadows, it's hard to tell when they're going to actually do a punching animation or a tongue animation, so run, fall to a choke point, and deal with them there. Hybrids. These are a pretty interesting enemy, and I do think they're a cool enemy, although a lot of the community seems to not like fighting them. Think of a combination between a big striker and a big shooter. They have some of the highest HP in the game. They can melee you for 12% of your HP, and their shooting ability is basically a machine gun. Granted, it's not a straight line machine gun, thankfully, but they fire very rapidly. Their ranged attacks only do 2% damage per hit. However, this can stack up very quickly if you're out in the open with them. 90% of the time you find these guys, it will be behind a blood door. However, the other 10% of the time, there will be some levels where they spawn in naturally and are sleeping on the floor. If you want to melee kill these guys, it requires 4 fully charged melee hits to the back. I've not been able to test too much with this due to the fact that the levels they sleep in, it's hard to get to the point, but I have found 4 fully charged melee hits to the back will kill them. 3 will not do it, and it seems like 4 anywhere on the body also will not do it. You might be able to get away with 3 to the back and 1 to the face, but I'm not quite sure about that. How to deal with them behind blood doors though? Well, try to stay behind cover. They will approach you, but they will not charge you like a striker will due to the fact that they do have ranged attacks, so they'll try to sort of stay in a middle ground. Charge you to get to the point where they can actually punch you or shoot you, but they're not going to bum rush you all the time. When they do start shooting at you, as soon as you get behind cover, they will stop shooting at you and they'll give you time to shoot back at them. Due to the fact that they have a ton of HP, you will want to use your secondary weapon and not try to use your primary. Mines are a good way of dealing with them, and shotgun turrets are a good way of dealing with them too. Just make sure you're not out in the open for too long, and make sure that you tend to focus fire when they appear, due to the fact that they can very quickly chunk you. If you're forced to fight them out in the open, shoot them as much as you can and try to get them to flinch and then just keep them down. But do be careful because in large numbers, these things can kill the healthiest of teams. GTFO's first sort of mini-boss, the birther, or mother by the more common term. These things are not just a simple shoot and kill type of enemy. They have very high health, I believe the highest health pool in the game currently. They are incredibly fast, and they are quite the challenge if you don't know what you're doing. Shooting the body will deal no damage and you'll get white hit markers. What you have to do is shoot the tumor little blob things that are all over their body to kill them that way. These things do not spawn very often, but when they do spawn, you have to be careful of it. They have no direct attacks. The only real attack they have is spawning in a giant cloud that, while it does look infectious, it is not infectious, but it does a great job at making it impossible to see anything when you're inside of it. These things will try to keep their distance and run away from you. How do they kill you though? Spawning in babies. They can spawn in waves of about 10 to 15 or so babies at once. These things, while having very low HP and only doing about 4% damage per hit, are incredibly fast and pretty much impossible to outrun. If you do have quite a bit of distance on them though, you are able to. The reason they're difficult to dodge is because they basically stop, attack, and continue moving very quickly, meaning if they're within attack range of you, they'll keep on hitting you and moving fast enough to the point where they will keep going for you. Using fully automatic weapons is the best way to deal with the babies. Just shoot for the head and just kill them quickly. But try not to run and stay grouped, that way you can deal with larger groups more easily. After all, reloading is probably the thing that will kill you when it comes to the babies. But how do you make it so that the mother just doesn't do that? Well, one C-foam grenade can fully encase a mother. If not, then you need 2 C-foam launcher fully charged shots in order to encase it. The best way to do it, especially if it's in a sleeping form, is C-foam it and then use stuff like shotguns, combat shotguns, burst cannons, sniper rifles, any heavy weapon, and just go to town on the tumors. If you do C-foam it, it cannot birth, and you will pretty much always be able to kill it before it gets out of the C-foam as long as your team is coordinated and quick. In cases where it will automatically wake up or it spawns in awoken, see if you can get it to a point where it will basically stand on a turret. Keep in mind, it keeps its distance from you, but it will get close enough to you to be able to birth. If you're too far away from it and you're not shooting at it, it will not birth. Find a choke point and position it near a turret so that the turret will just annihilate its face, and then you can shoot any of the tumors that the turret's not able to hit. Do be careful though, because obviously a turret's not going to aim for the tumors, so let it do some work, but then make sure you go in to finish it off. It does have a distinct scream when it does birth, so keep an eye out for that so you know when it occurs. And the final enemy I want to talk about are the spitters. These are the only invincible stationary enemy in the game. You cannot kill them, but you can disable them. How they work is when a player walks near them, they will start to expand, glow brighter green, and then explode and let out a shriek. The explosion does a small amount of damage to you and gives you a fair amount of infection, the amount varying depending on how close or far away you are to that spitter. These enemies have a nasty way of just chunking down your HP, especially in areas where there's a ton of them all over the walls and you can literally walk around a corner and get hit by 5 of them. You need to be cautious around spitters because you can't kill them. How you disable them though is shine your flashlight on them. Long range flashlight is a beautiful thing when it comes to spitters. If you shine your light on them, it will disable them for about 15 seconds, meaning they will not charge up whatsoever. If you attack them with a melee or they actually explode on you, they're inactive for 35 seconds. Don't do the melee though, because the melee is still going to give you infection. If you C-foam them, it will disable them for a minute. However, I really wouldn't recommend C-foaming. Just stick to the flashlight, it's a good enough tool anyway. Just be careful, if you know there's one around the corner, walk around the corner alright facing towards it, but keep in mind your light has to be facing on top of it. If it's sort of glitched into a wall a little bit, you can't just shine it at it and it'll work. You have to make sure you get the right angle. Also, take advantage of weapons that have further flashlight ranges or wider ones. Use them to your advantage and either flash a larger group of enemies or flash enemies from further away. Just be careful and make sure you don't end up accidentally flashing spitters when enemies are nearby and setting off those enemies. As for the shriek cannot fully set off an enemy. However, if an enemy is just glowing and a spitter goes off and shrieks, it will cause them to throb, but it will not cause them to fully awaken. Overall, spitters are not too difficult to deal with as long as you're making sure you're watching your sides and you're flashing them whenever need be. Also, flashing them does reset the timer, so you don't have to flash once every 15, you can just hold your light on them. And there is the ending of that video. I've talked about everything I wanted to talk about, or I hope I did. I may have forgotten something. If I did forget something, or you think of something that I maybe just didn't mention, or I just didn't talk about something good enough and you didn't understand it completely, let me know down in the comments. These videos are meant to teach people and help people get a better understanding of this game, and if you don't understand it, then ask me. I will gladly take time to write down a response. Even if this video has been posted a month ago, I will probably come back and answer any questions that I see. After all, I'm a small YouTuber, so when I get a comment, it's pretty easy for me to notice it. So let me know and I'll help you understand everything to the best of my abilities. I will be making more of guide videos like this in the future. Those are going to be rundown specific though. For example, when Rundown 4 comes out, I'll make a new video talking about the new enemy variants, any new items, consumables, if there are new type of security doors or level mechanics. If enemy mechanics have changed again, I will talk about all of that in a future video, just to stay up to date and let people know that stuff has changed. Keep in mind, this is an early access game, so stuff is prone to change over time. But other than that, that's all I've got for you guys today in this video. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, it does help out, it helps my videos get noticed. Subscribe to the channel so you know when I post future videos, and just help me grow this community a bit more. I've been enjoying seeing the growth that's occurred over the past few months, and it's pretty nice to see, so hopefully we can keep on going with that and make a great GTFO community here. I do plan on making this my primary game for quite a while. I will eventually do other games in the future, but I think GTFO will be something I will always have on my channel as long as updates are always coming out and new levels are being made. But that's all for you guys. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.